Today, day of the shooting of this virtual guided tour, is November 10, 2020. It is officially the first day of our Edward Burtynsky exhibition. Edward Burtynsky will be in a few minutes with us in his studio in Toronto. It will be 10 a.m. for him, and I am surrounded by his work here in Paris, and for me, it's 4 p.m. Edward Burtynsky is one of our most famous and influential Canadian artists. His photographic work is known worldwide, and he did many thematic exhibitions, one of which is Anthropocene, that was co-organized by the MAST in Italy, the Art Gallery of Ontario, and the National Gallery of Canada recently. For the Canadian Cultural Centre, we conceived the show specifically built for the space, for the architecture of the space, and focusing on the theme of extraction, a central issue for the planet and a central theme in Burtynsky's art for decades. We approach extraction by looking not only at the subject matter, but also at form and at scale. So there are two underlying themes in this exhibition, from human to global scale on one end, and Mounds and Voids on the other. So we have, in a way, three threads running through the exhibition, and they will guide this virtual tour with Edouard. Hello, Edouard. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and also an honor.
It's a pleasure, and I'm sorry I'm not in Paris with you on this November the 10th, but and I noticed that the mural is behind you that I have not seen completed in its full scale, so I wish I could be there in person with you.
You have been seeing a few images of the exhibition, and we will speak about it as if we were together. So I will want to start by asking you about how you felt having to do that show, not in a museum, but in that kind of space that is a very particular architectural space, and also a political one in a way, because we are the official representation of Canada in France.
Well, I wanted to, I mean, obviously there's a deep history with Europe and Africa, and a lot of what's happened over the last century or more is the division of Africa and the move towards gathering resources from the continent, and so I thought it was very interesting to bring these images back into a European setting. And to show some of them for the first time. So the one that you're standing in front of is being shown for the very, very first time, as the other mural is as well. And the one that you're standing in front of is from Madagascar, and it shows artisanal mining. And it's something that I haven't photographed a lot of. Artisanal mining is, probably about half of the mining in the world is individuals who stake a small claim or just even go to a location and start panning for gold or panning for silver or for looking for sapphires, which is what they're looking for here. And it was a way to show a kind of on scale of several thousand people who have set up in this area looking for sapphires in Madagascar. And making murals of scale, it's almost like an immersive experience where you fall in and you can kind of explore it endlessly. I almost think that there are thousands of people in that image. If you begin to really look, they're everywhere, back in the village, around the holes that they're digging, and it's that kind of visual exploration of this landscape where they're just digging these holes. They go down sometimes 10 to 15 meters, and they have to manually use plastic bags to pump air down there so that the worker down there doesn't asphyxiate, because there's methane in that area too that you can be overcome by. So it is a very, very labor intensive, very low yield, but there's sapphires there, a way of mining, and it's just random chance that you come across one as you dig this hole into the ground. Using that 150 megapixel camera and taking about 10 images and stitching them together and then being able to use that stitched file to print in sections a mural this scale. So it is the size of an outdoor billboard, but it has the detail of my traditional work. We could put your kind of, put your face and get your eyes within about, 6 inches of it, and it's still, all the details are still present.
And of course, looking at those details on this specific mural on Madagascar is different than looking at the details in your other mural. That is a different subject, that is the industrial counterpart of this artisanal mining. And I would like to ask, because the feeling for the viewer is different, when you look at those two murals that face each other in the gallery space, different in the sense, to my point of view, that here, when we go into detail, we discover things that are a discomfort, of course, for the viewer, because the more we look at, the more we probably engage into the subject and are overwhelmed by it. Where in front, when we look at the industrial site that is taken at Johannesburg, where you have the same level of detail, the same density of information, the same amount of data, probably, and way of stitching images one into the other, of course, the effect is different, because then we are in front of a grandiose landscape, and we don't feel the same emotion, of course. But you wanted to put those two images facing each other. Why? You wanted to put those specific two together, confronting each other.
And it's an interesting point you make. And the idea was that if you look at the image in Madagascar, the one behind you, there's a human dimension to it. You can see the human labor, and you can see the children, and you can see the mothers and wives and the girls and the young boys. And so there's a complete story that unfolds, and you can find many of these little moments where people are sitting around and talking, or people are just, lounging, or they're going back to the village, or they're, somewhere hovering over one of the holes, waiting for somebody to come out who's working down there. So there's a complete kind of human story that I think is accessible visually in this image. And if you go to the one across from it, it is more in keeping with technology and the industrial era, in that there are very few humans in there. Everything is working on conveyors. The infrastructure to produce coal at such a scale almost removes the human being from the scene, and now you just have the robotic technology that moves things around and makes piles, and there are very few people in the image. Half of the world excavates and extracts using the latest mining techniques and the latest technology, and using the mechanical advantage of electrical motors and the internal combustion engine, and versus the artisanal, which is still human energy that produces the yield of the product that they're trying to extract. And so they are both extractive industries, but at different scales. One is the scale of modern industry, and the other one is at the scale of human energy. Talking
about the detail and the effect of the detail and detailing and density of the image, of course I want to ask you about the way you deal with color also, because for me it's quite interesting in that confrontation or opposition of those two very impressive murals. The fact that color is punctuating like all over the Madagascar mural, and it's a color linked to the life, as you say, the stories of the people. It's their, what they wear, what they hold in their hands. And here in a position or a contrast, I could say, in that industrial mining mural, color seems in a way more artificial. It's quite interesting, as if you had insisted on certain aspect, like here that strange rest of grass, or the color of some items that suddenly animate the image that is in a way a darker image in relation to, paradoxically, the Madagascar one. So I wanted also to ask if you play with color, because, and how you understand it in that work, if it's a different issue or challenge to do that in the mural at this size than when you are on normal size prints.
Well, it's interesting what you point out about the color, and quite frankly, on one level I hadn't even thought of it, but as you were speaking, I was looking at the mural behind you. I think what's interesting about it is that every bit of that surface, there isn't anything in that surface that one could say is the natural color of that landscape. It has been, processing coal there for decades. That's probably the soil you're looking at is probably coal dust on that soil. If you go to the artisanal mining, that is still the color of the riverbed. I rarely shoot in sunlight, but in this case, and again with the incredible technology that's around today, I can photograph with this camera and contain the highlights and the shadows in full detail. And I can control those shadows and highlights. This was something that if I shot back with conventional film, I would never even bring out a conventional 4x5 or 8x10 camera to try and take this picture. It wouldn't be very interesting. All the shadows would just be black, blocked up, and just almost no information in the shadow areas. So again, with the scale and with the technology, I've always, with my work, tried to understand new ways in which I can work out there using the best of what is available in technology. And I'm never married to one way. If I can do the same thing and do it better than I did the year before, I will adopt that technology. It's just been the way I've always worked, because we've been on this almost non-stop technological curve with the medium. So light and color and detail and scale are always, have always been at work. But now the actual size of the images that I can work with allow for a viewer to have a real body experience, I think, with these things on the wall. It's like you are almost in the presence of it. You can feel it as if you were, I'm hoping that's the effect you're experiencing, that you're almost kind of, falling into that world. You're almost, enveloped by it.
At the same time, to my point of view, and that's the fascinating aspect of that mural at this size, is the fact that it's almost a non-human point of view. I don't know, it's linked to the fact that you are linking those images together, or if you have different point of views when you shoot that site. But there is something that is very strong about it, that is in a way unnatural, not in an obvious way. But this is for me another level of a perception that is totally different from what we feel in front of a standard large print. The powerful, almost non-human. And I don't mean divine when I say that, not at all, okay? It's just probably linked to the technology also.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, in that one of the things I've always understood is that photography often, or taking a photograph of a place, brings that whole place into a singular plane, into sharp focus. Our eyes in the real world do not work that way. Our eyes have about an 8-degree hyper sharpness, and that's when we read. We unwittingly always go to that 8 degrees because it's our highest resolution on our retina, and everything else softens up. That's how our world presents itself to our brain. When you look at a photograph, you're now taking that sharpness and you've spread it over the whole image plane. And that's not how we ever perceive the world. So you're perceiving a world in a way that's impossible in real life. And I often said, even early in my quarry work, I'd go there, and I remember being with an assistant at one point, and they didn't understand what I was photographing, and I said, here, take a look. Take a look at what I'm photographing on my 8x10 camera. And they couldn't believe that the place that they were standing in could yield something as interesting as that. They couldn't see it. They only saw it when I let them look behind, you know, the dark cloth with an 8x10 camera. So we just don't perceive the world that way. And when you understand that transition, that when you slice out a piece of the world, create it and make it all sharp and bring it on a singular plane, you experience it in a very different way, and you isolate it from everything else. And it's often more interesting than the reality of being there at that place at that time.
So Ed, in that main exhibition space, you also wanted to include 3 augmented reality pieces. So now what we see on the walls are not the work of arts, but the targets. And we need, of course, an iPad to activate the work. So this is a totally different way, of course, to apprehend your work. And this is playing with the 2 murals in the main exhibition space. Those are very recent pieces you created that also include a lot of different images in one, not final image, because we cannot call that an image in the end. It's an experience of imagery.
Yeah. So I've been interested in photography. I call it photography 3.0. And I've always had this fascination with, actually it started with Star Trek and the holodeck, this ability to bring the 3-dimensional world into our world. And even holography, I was always fascinated with it. But I always was a little unsatisfied with the results of it. So when I realized that that photogrammetry took that digital image, and by taking many, many, many digital images and using software, I can bring those images together to recreate very realistically and with super high detail the 3-dimensional image of the thing that I'm capturing. So what you're looking at there with the iPad is one of the largest internal combustion engines ever built. It's to power one of the largest trucks ever built. It's a truck that can carry a 400-ton payload. And this motor, which produces, I think it's 4,500 horsepower, is driving a generator, electrical generator, to send electricity to these big wheels to be able to move this largest of machines that moves the coal to the factory. So so it is, and for me to be able to recreate that motor and allow somebody to really experience it. And it's more like sculpture than photography, but at its core, it still is photography that makes the image. So it has been this kind of transition, and I realized that I have to think more in terms of you know, the Duchamp ready-mades or Rauschenberg ready-mades versus photography. I go out into the world and I capture something and I bring it into the gallery space. So at the core of that is the internal combustion engine and this readily available fuel through the form of oil that has allowed humans to become 8 billion and growing. I believe it's the internal combustion engine as a single piece of technology and that fuel that has allowed this unprecedented population explosion of humans onto the planet.
Here, when we look at that work of art, or I don't know, artistic experience or visual experience, we are struck by the fact that there's, of course, there is no heaviness. It's very light, it's not dirty, and it's suddenly like a ghost of something that exists. How do you situate that object?
Well, for me, it becomes, as I said, more like a Richard Chamberlain, like a piece that you bring into the gallery space, but it's dematerialized. It would be impossible, put it this way, it would be impossible to bring that engine into the embassy because you don't have a door big enough and you'd have to take out a whole wall to bring it in. And in fact, even as you experience it, is not, I wasn't trying to keep it at full scale because you would have to even stand back further and the trigger would have to be even larger and the experience gets more difficult to kind of trigger and to walk around it when it gets that large. And it is photographically absolutely accurate. I see it as a three-dimensional photograph. It's the you know, because there's two things that are happening when you're experiencing that with the iPad. You have two files. You have the three-dimensional polygon file, which is the wire frame that creates the accurate rendition of it. And then you have the texture map. You have all the tones and all the colors and all the rust and the grit and the oil and everything mapped onto the actual polygon frame. And when you walk around it, you know, you're actually having these two files having to refresh themselves literally at 30 frames per second so that you get the experience. And the accelerometer in your phone or in your iPad always tells you the position of the iPad and it's constantly correcting for you to be able to walk around the object and to experience it. So this is only, again, possible because the CPUs in our phones and in our iPads are fast enough to process this amount of data to allow you to have this kind of a rich experience with this object. And again, one of the first really successful ones that I did was the Tusk Pile outside of Nairobi when they burnt the tusks in Kenya. And there were about 11,000 tusks that were being burnt on this one evening as a signal to poachers and would-be poachers and to those who do trade in ivory that Kenya will no longer tolerate the trade of ivory and the poaching of elephants for ivory. And so they were going to burn it, and the day before I got a chance to capture that pile. And that is like a photographic record of that pile, and anybody and the next day it was burned. So the only way you can experience that today is through that experience. So to me it was like a portrait of that pile in the third dimension. So it's kind of like being at the cusp of a new shift and a new form on the level of black and white to color. Now we have digital two-dimensional color photography into digital three-dimensional color experiences. And they are experiences because but you can print these, like the Tusk Pile. I have a full color 3D printer and I could take the same file and make a 3D print of it. So it can be printed. It's not impossible to print it.
But would you do that? Would you do a 3D print?
Yeah. I can show you it if you want. I have it right back here. So yes, you can. I can take that engine, and I have a printer in one of my 3D studios that can print that engine as a 3D print. So it can be turned back into an object, which is, you know, interesting. You know, I think it's you know, a new form that again is now kind of at a very, very kind of nascent stage that's just coming into our world, is the ivory Tusk Pile as a 3D object. And I could, you know, easily print it larger, but it is taking that photographic representation in the third dimension and printing it as a three-dimensional object that you can experience and put on a pedestal or just walk around it and look at it as well. So it is, and it's true to life. It's, you know, and to make this object, it took about 2,500 images. You have to photograph in behind all the ivory that you see. You have to go into all the nooks and crannies to capture all the detail. There's a lot of, you know, technical things that you need to do to get something like this to work. And it took me almost, once I captured the images, it took me almost a year to figure out the best software to put it all together to make it look as a realistic 3D pile. But again, that's it's something that is always captured my imagination, finding new ways to bring them into representation and into experience.
Let's remind that the title of the exhibition is Mounds and Voids, and I am in front now of a very solemn and impressive mounds, that is your famous pyramid of Bao Steel. I wanted to start with that one, and this is a selection of 14 prints that we are showing on the mezzanine. This one is the first, but let's remember that in the background of your industrial mural downstairs, there are a lot of those pyramids.
I decided to go to China, and thinking that China, if you want to understand globalism and the Industrial Revolution and how it's remanifesting itself in contemporary times, you have to go to China to see it, because China has become the manufacturer for the world. And Bao Steel was the largest steel factory in all of China outside of Shanghai. And I managed to get in there. I think today it would be much more difficult to get access to these kinds of places. But what you're looking at is coal that has to be burned and is used to melt steel and to create the right kinds of steel. So it takes enormous amounts of heat, and there's also coking coal that's also necessary for the making of steel. So steel represents a lot of the contribution to CO2 in the atmosphere as well, because you need a lot of it. So, so somehow, how do you bring that story? How do you bring those images, and how do you find the right form? And it is pyramidic. It does feel like you're looking, you know, you've gone to Egypt and you're looking at the Great Pyramids of Egypt or something. It has that kind of reference in a way, but at the same time, it is the greatest single thing that we mine that represents the greatest existential threat to all life on the planet. The one that you're standing at, the Bao Steel, it's fascinating because I was driving around it and I saw it and I drove by it, and I probably went maybe another half a kilometer or a kilometer, and I said stop, you know, and I started reversing back. Because normally I don't photograph backlit. Backlit's not I usually like frontal light, and this is a backlit image. And I went back to it and I went, this is something really powerful about the lines, about the pyramid. It just, all of a sudden, it took a while for me to kind of see the composition. I saw it, and that sometimes happens, and I went past it. And then all of a sudden it said, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on back there. I need to look at it again. And it is very much the classic lines that lead your eye to this pyramid. And that kind of reinforces the kind of uplift of it, you know, that those lines kind of, you know, allow you to, you know, your visual experience to push up into the center of the image.
This is one of the major pollution sites, as you say, on the planet, and it's in Alberta. And here in that selection, I thought it was very important to have it. So this is in your country.
Yes. Yes, so the Alberta Oil Sands currently stands as the largest surface engineering project in the world, because it's mining. It's like a big mining operation, because the oil sits just beneath about 7 to 10 meters of what's called overburden topsoil, and they scrape that away, and then there's about 20 meters to 30 meters of sand, which has about 12% of bitumen. And bitumen is like an early stage oil. So it is ancient sea life. So all oil is sea life. And all coal is terrestrial plant life that's been compressed. So when we put oil in our tanks, it's come from the sea, usually like plankton and sea life that's settled to the bottom. And this is this sand and is from the erosion. It used to be a valley with 2 mountains on each side, and it's the erosion of those mountains from the rains with the water creating life and precipitating into that sand, which is what is creating this synthetic oil or early stage oil. And then they've discovered that they can heat, because they knew oil was always there, because you can see it on the Athabasca River, but you have to heat it up to over 80 degrees Celsius, and once that happens, the sand drops out and the oil floats up, and then they were able to separate the oil from the sand. The oil in Alberta alone is about 2 trillion barrels of known oil that's underground there. About 200 billion are accessible with current day technology. So the fact of the matter is, we as humans, the oil age doesn't end because we run out of oil, just like the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. It's very much, the oil age exists until we find an alternative to power ourselves. So to me, it was looking at the oil sands in Canada was an important place to explore, in that it's the largest, second largest known reserve of accessible oil after Saudi Arabia. But unfortunately, it creates a much greater footprint, CO2 footprint, than the Saudi oil, because of the enormous energy it takes to not only mine it and the cost of all those machines to mine it, but also to heat all of that material up to over 80 degrees centigrade to allow the oil to surface and separate from the sand.
So it is, of course, a dangerous, a bit provocative relationship that you allowed me to make by putting that one from Alberta near the Delta du Niger images. We decided to show 2 of them, and I will invite you to follow me here. So after the Alberta Oil Sands image, we find this diptych. It's not a diptych, it's the way we present it in the show that makes me speak that way. Those are taken in Africa, and they are showing also that porosity of soil and toxicity of water that is damaging the ground. But this is a very different context, because we are not in a highly industrialized and controlled and protected site. We are, just on the contrary, on a poor site where people try to obtain what they can from what's leaking from the pipelines.
It's not leaking. They're actually found a way that they can tap into the pipelines, put a valve on it, and then be able to take the oil from the pressurized pipelines. And it's very much similar to down below, where on the one side, the Alberta Oil Sands is large corporations, big industry, the big, huge trucks and machinery to harvest that oil. And this is artisanal oil production. And then they have about more than 50% of the oil, that thick, goopy, oil that all the first half is evaporated. they have product from that first half, but the other half needs a more sophisticated refinery to crack those carbon chains. So they can't do it. So they take the stuff that would normally make asphalt and plastics and different oils and things, thicker oils that we would use. They can't get them out of that. So they just pour them off into the landscape because they don't know what else to do with it. And it is a tragic story for for those who lived in the Niger Delta and were able to have a life there in the past, to the discovery of oil and the corruption of that discovery, and the money never came back, and the villagers never really enjoyed the wealth of that oil, with the natural resources being compromised, and now you can only make money from the oil. It's a tragic story.
Yes, and it makes also, sadly, a connection with your Madagascar mural, of course. That is another form of devastated land where people go also to find something to survive, and after that, what will be left? Holes in the grounds that won't be protected and in which people can anytime fall. So there is also this artisanal mining or artisanal form of extraction that we wanted to show here, that is dialoguing with the main gallery works. And we are now in Africa, and we will follow with those two images that are, for me, cruelly colorful and cruelly beautiful, but that show us also that work on scale that you master so well.
Yeah, the image from Madagascar, what they're doing there, because they don't have machinery, they create a human conveyor belt to be able to move a lot of material. It was quite fascinating to see how, when you don't have, mechanical power through, a big digger or a big, shovel that can move earth quickly, then you need humans. And they are paid almost nothing. I don't even think that these workers were making more than maybe 50 cents or maximum $1 US. The opportunity for farming and for forestry and all the other things that one might have had in the past as a way to make a living and using elements of nature, things that we take from nature, the choices are becoming less and less in Madagascar because it's been so compromised as a country.
That wall, Edward, is made of 3 different images, 2 of Bangladesh and 1 of an Iberian quarry. Of course, we will notice the strong relationship with the Madagascar image that you were just talking about, link through color, but here it is about rust and another form of transformation that we are showing. I said that this was an exhibition about extraction, but there is also extraction not only of the resources in the soil, but extraction of elements from big boats. That is what the Bangladesh, the shipyard image are about. In a way, it is also making a link with what you were saying of your sculptural imagery downstairs. When you were talking about those AR images appearing as photographic sculptures. Here, we can't avoid thinking about sculpture when, and I'm not the first one, of course, to say that. Many very good authors noticed it, but that one is quite amazing in terms of sculptural effect. But at the same time, what I wanted to stress to finish that virtual tour with you is the fact that we have here for the first time, we are confronted to a human gaze, because in all the other images we see humans, we see the human figure, we see it from above working. Probably we see them working while they don't necessarily notice that you are photographing them, I don't know. Maybe you can tell us that. But here in this one, we are we are in front of a portrait, and it's the only image in which we have that strong and powerful confrontation. At the same time, in a way, when I look at that person, I have the impression that he's almost cut and inserted in the image.
It's interesting for that image. It came about through a two-step process. When I photographed back then, I'm photographing with actual film, 4x5 color negative film. And to make sure that my technology was working, that I was focused, that I was properly exposed, you know, that my composition was the way I wanted, I would do what's called a Polaroid Type 55. It's a black and white rendering of the image, and I can see a small little black and white print, 4 inches by 5 inches. And then I could also get a negative that I can hold up, and I'd have a magnifier that was 10 times, and I can see if my focus wasn't perfect. So I did that, but when I looked at the picture, I saw him standing in the middle, but there were probably about another 8 workers all around him. So I went up to him and I said, "Can you please stay, and all other workers, please get out of the picture." I wanted to do a portrait of him. So it was a kind of a moment where the test image led me to him as a subject, because he looked so powerful in that test image.
So Ed, we are closing the show with those 2 last images, one of Carrara Quarry and the other one of the Tyron mine. Carrara, you went there before. Why did you go back? I'm very curious to know why you felt it was interesting to shoot it again, but obviously with a different technology.
I wanted to go back there because I no longer used film. I no longer was limited to standing wherever I could stand on the ground. I could then use a drone and put my high-resolution camera onto a drone and choose wherever I want to have as a point of perspective. And I photographed that particular mountain 25 years earlier, but there was no way I could photograph it this way. So I wanted to come back and use the new tools, and everything from 3D, virtual reality, to drone work, to film work, to VR, and I'm using all these different tools to be able to kind of re-look at something that I've been to, and now it's had 25 more years of extraction, so the scale of it is even greater than what I saw 25 years ago, because as the tools got better and better, they can take more and more, faster and faster. So I went back, and this location also ended up being really important and a prominent part of the film Anthropocene, the Human Epoch, as well, that I had worked with and co-directed with Nick DePonce and Jennifer Bechwal. So and so that was really coming back with this whole crew to re-look at a location I've been to, and to see it with new eyes, using the latest tools at my disposal.
Seeing with new eyes is also something that can be done with new exhibitions, and now that we've been hanging those images, I wanted to stress how incredible is the relationship that we can suddenly perceive in this exhibition between, for example, that path going around the marble, the mountain, and the Delta du Niger. It is very striking how your gaze find, structures from site to site that can be that make a big whole, a unity, a body, something that goes through all the different bodies of your work. So I wanted to end with those two because it's making not only the link with those other images and subjects, but it's also making the link with the gallery downstairs where you are using very, very contemporary technology. So Edward, I thank you so much to have been with us today. It was great to have that tour with you.
Well, thank you, Catherine, and thank you for curating such an amazing group of works that you've assembled together and put side by side. And it's really wonderful to hear your journey through your thoughts and to why you chose those pieces, and maybe help the viewer a bit to kind of understand some of the backstories to some of these images, and both from the from the subject matter to the technology to the kind of references to history of art and composition and color and scale and all those other things that I love to work with in my art. So it's been a real pleasure. And by the way, for your viewers, there is in the image you're standing beside in Carrera, it is one of my few cameo appearances. There's 3 figures near the bottom on the left-hand side. That's my crew with me flying the drone, taking a picture. So we are in the image of that picture. So those
Great.
3. So
we'll do a close-up.
Yeah. So enjoy the. I hope your audiences enjoy it. I hope they can. That COVID subsides a bit and people can come out and enjoy being in the presence of the original, because not seeing the real prints is not really experiencing the work as it was meant to be seen. So so it's great to see them large on your walls, because that's how I've always intended them to be experienced by audiences. So thank you for bringing the show to Paris.